Peter Parker is the quiet, academically gifted kid most of his classmates overlook, or worse, mock. Only two people treat him differently. One is Mary Jane Watson, the girl who lives next door and has unknowingly held Peter's heart since childhood. Unfortunately, she's currently dating the school's golden boy and resident bully, Flash Thompson. The other person in Peter's corner is his closest friend, Harry Osborn, the privileged son of brilliant but demanding industrialist Norman Osborn. Norman holds impossibly high standards for Harry and rarely hides his disappointment. Strangely enough, he seems more impressed by Peter's natural talent for science. With a smirk, Norman once remarks that he has a scientific mind of his own, clearly admiring Peter's potential. During a class visit to Oscorp's research facility, Peter's usual bad luck continues. He awkwardly watches Harry charm Mary Jane while he stands by unnoticed. Meanwhile, inside the lab, a genetically altered spider escapes containment and bites Peter before anyone notices. At the same time, Norman is scrambling to secure a lucrative military contract. He unveils an advanced glider and a powerful human enhancement serum. Animal testing shows astonishing results. Test subjects experience massive strength increases, but one trial also reveals alarming side effects. Aggression, instability, even madness. Despite warnings from Dr. Strom to refine the formula, Norman is pressured by military officials to produce a successful human demonstration within 2 weeks, or risk losing funding entirely. Back home, Peter begins feeling ill after the spider bite. He skips dinner, worrying Aunt May and Uncle Ben, who have raised him since his parents' passing. That night, he collapses. Unseen changes begin as the spider's altered DNA merges with his own. Meanwhile, desperate and impatient, Norman tests the experimental serum on himself. The transformation is immediate and catastrophic. Overcome by violent mania, he turns on Dr. Strom in a frenzy. The next morning, Peter wakes up transformed. His eyesight is perfect. His once slim frame is now athletic and toned. Even stranger, his hands cling to surfaces like adhesive. At school, Mary Jane barely acknowledges him until he instinctively catches her and her spilled lunch tray with lightning-fast reflexes. For once, she really sees him. But the moment turns chaotic when organic webbing unexpectedly shoots from Peter's wrists. Trying to slip away unnoticed, Peter accidentally sends a tray flying at Flash, triggering a confrontation. Flash swings wildly, but Peter effortlessly dodges every punch and knocks him down with a single hit, shocking everyone watching. Later, Peter experiments with his new abilities. He scales walls like an insect, leaps between rooftops, and discovers he can launch web lines strong enough to swing across buildings. It takes practice and more than a few failed attempts, but he gradually gains control over his powers. That evening, Peter returns home to find Uncle Ben finishing a kitchen repair alone, a task Peter had promised to help with. Across the street, Mary Jane's father is drunkenly shouting at her again. When she steps outside for air, Peter joins her. They talk about life after graduation. Peter dreams of moving to Manhattan, working as a freelance photographer to support himself through college. Mary Jane confesses she wants to pursue acting in the city, though she feels foolish saying it out loud. Peter reassures her, telling her she's capable of more than she realizes. The next day, Peter spots a newspaper ad promoting an amateur wrestling competition, offering a $3,000 prize to anyone who can survive 3 minutes in the ring with the reigning champion, Bonesaw. Inspired, Peter designs a homemade costume with a spider motif. Before he leaves, Uncle Ben confronts him about his recent attitude, skipping responsibilities and fighting at school. Calm but firm, Ben reminds Peter that power and responsibility go hand in hand. Frustrated, Peter lashes out, telling Ben to stop trying to replace his father, and storms out. At the wrestling arena, Peter signs up under the alias, the Human Spider. However, the flashy ring announcer thinks the name lacks punch and rebrands him on the spot with something catchier, Spider-Man. Peter steps into the ring and overwhelms Bonesaw with surprising ease, finishing the match in well under the promised 3 minutes. However, when he goes to collect his prize money, the promoter refuses to pay the full amount, arguing that the deal only applied if he lasted the entire time. Since Peter won too quickly, he's handed a fraction of what he earned. Frustrated and bitter, Peter leaves just as a desperate thief storms in, holds the promoter at gunpoint, and robs him. When the crook rushes past, Peter has the opportunity to stop him, but chooses not to. He figures it isn't his problem, especially after being cheated. Moments later, Peter receives devastating news. Police cars surround a crime scene nearby. The victim is Uncle Ben, shot during a carjacking. Peter arrives just in time to hear his uncle's final words before he passes away. Overcome with guilt and rage, Peter hunts down the gunman. As he swings through the city, growing more confident with his web-slinging, he corners the criminal inside an abandoned warehouse. There, Peter realizes the horrifying truth. The killer is the same man he allowed to escape earlier. The thief panics and pulls a weapon, but Peter quickly disarms him and shatters his wrist. Attempting to flee, the man stumbles backward and falls from a high platform, plunging to his death. The weight of responsibility crashes down on Peter. He returns home, now fully aware that his inaction led to tragedy, and embraces Aunt May, who is left grieving her husband. In a remote desert testing ground, the military official who pressured Norman observes a rival corporation demonstrating an advanced exoskeleton suit, intended to replace Oscorp's unstable enhancement program. Suddenly, laughter echoes through the sky. Norman Osborn, clad in experimental armor and riding his glider, swoops in and destroys the demonstration in a fiery assault. Back in New York, graduation day arrives. Peter and Harry complete high school. Norman offers Harry a lukewarm congratulations for barely scraping by, while warmly praising Peter for his science award, an acknowledgement that further strains Harry's insecurities. Meanwhile, Mary Jane ends her relationship with Flash, something Harry quickly takes notice of. That evening, Peter quietly mourns Uncle Ben. Aunt May comforts him as he reflects on the lesson Ben tried to teach him, that extraordinary ability demands accountability. Inspired, Peter refines his homemade design into a fully realized costume and begins using his powers to fight crime. Word spreads throughout the city about a masked vigilante swinging between skyscrapers. People start calling him Spider-Man. Not everyone is impressed. J. Jonah Jameson, the loud and opinionated editor-in-chief of the Daily Bugle, publicly labels Spider-Man a menace. Still, he can't deny that stories about the web-slinger sell newspapers. Frustrated that no photographer can capture a clear shot of the hero, Jameson announces a cash reward for exclusive images. Peter, uninterested in fame but desperate for money, sees an opportunity. While job hunting, Peter unexpectedly runs into Mary Jane and learns she's now dating Harry, who has also become his roommate. Later, Peter spots the Daily Bugle's offer for Spider-Man photos. Realizing he's uniquely qualified, he rigs a camera to automatically snap pictures while he's in action stopping crimes. At the Bugle's office, Jameson harshly criticizes the photos, but still buys them. He refuses to offer Peter a staff position, but agrees to pay him as a freelance photographer. Meanwhile, at Oscorp, the board of directors delivers shocking news to Norman. They plan to merge the company with Quest Aerospace, and as part of the deal, Norman will be removed as CEO. The announcement is scheduled for Oscorp's upcoming World Unity Festival. Norman, furious and feeling betrayed after all his sacrifices, takes the decision personally. During the festival, tensions rise. Harry is irritated that Mary Jane didn't wear the elegant dress he suggested, hoping to impress his father. Peter is on assignment, snapping photos for the Bugle, when a sudden wave of danger hits him, his spider sense warning him moments before disaster strikes. The sky erupts as Norman appears in full armor, now calling himself the Green Goblin. Riding his glider, he launches explosives into the festival, targeting the board members who ousted him. Chaos spreads as civilians scatter. Peter quickly changes into Spider-Man and engages the Goblin in a mid-air battle while rescuing bystanders from falling debris. After damaging the glider, Spider-Man forces the villain to retreat, but not before the Goblin vows revenge. As part of the destruction, a balcony collapses. Mary Jane nearly falls to her death, but Spider-Man catches her midair and swings her safely away. She is left in awe of her masked savior. Later, she excitedly tells Harry how amazing Spider-Man was, sparking jealousy. Peter overhears their conversation and can't help but smile quietly to himself. Harry eventually apologizes to Peter for dating Mary Jane, but points out that Peter never acted on his feelings. Elsewhere, Norman's mind begins to fracture. He stares into a mirror, only to see his reflection speaking back to him, mocking him. The alternate personality reveals that it was responsible for the killings. Horrified, Norman realizes the serum has shattered his sanity. Yet the darker voice tempts him with promises of greater power and insists that Spider-Man must either join them or be eliminated. At the Daily Bugle, Jameson boldly coins the name Green Goblin for the mysterious attacker. Almost immediately, the Goblin crashes into his office. Grabbing Jameson by the throat, he demands to know who has been supplying the photographs of Spider-Man. Jameson, trembling but stubbornly loyal to his source, refuses to give Peter's name. Jameson refuses to betray his source, insisting the Spider-Man photos are delivered anonymously. Before the Green Goblin can press further, Spider-Man crashes in to save the editor. However, the Goblin releases a burst of toxic gas, overwhelming Peter and knocking him unconscious. When Peter awakens, he finds himself perched high above the city beside the Goblin. Instead of attacking, the villain speaks calmly. He argues that despite Spider-Man's heroics, the public will eventually turn on him. People fear what they don't understand. Rather than fight each other, the Goblin proposes they join forces, rule together instead of being rejected separately. He tells Spider-Man to consider the offer and then disappears into the night. The following morning, the Daily Bugle publishes a misleading headline implying Spider-Man collaborated with the Goblin during the attack on Jameson. With the paper's wide influence, public opinion begins shifting. Suspicion replaces admiration, just as Norman predicted. Later, Peter visits Mary Jane after she fails yet another audition. He tries to lift her spirits with comfort food and quiet encouragement. She mentions she already has plans with Harry. Peter awkwardly asks how things are going between them but stops short. MJ notices his curiosity and teasingly questions why he cares so much. Before leaving, she flashes him a playful smile and calls him Tiger. On her way home, Peter notices a group of men following her. He quickly changes into Spider-Man and intervenes. After he scares them off, MJ thanks him. Hanging upside down in the pouring rain, Spider-Man shares a lingering kiss with her as she gently pulls his mask just high enough to reveal his lips. Determined to draw Spider-Man out again, the Green Goblin sets an apartment building ablaze. Peter rescues a baby from the flames and searches for others, only to confront the Goblin once more. When Peter firmly rejects the idea of an alliance, the villain retaliates, injuring his arm before retreating. Soon after, Aunt May hosts Thanksgiving dinner, inviting Mary Jane and the Osborns. Before grace is said, Norman notices Peter favoring his wounded arm, the same injury Spider-Man sustained. The realization flashes across his face. Norman excuses himself from the table, and Harry follows, excited for his father to finally meet MJ properly. Instead, Norman cruelly claims she is only interested in Harry's wealth. Inside, Peter, May, and MJ overhear everything. Embarrassed and hurt, MJ leaves, while Harry struggles to defend his father's harsh words. That night, Norman's fractured mind urges him to strike at Spider-Man's heart. The Goblin soon pays Aunt May a terrifying visit, leaving her shaken and hospitalized. Peter arrives at her bedside and listens as she murmurs about terrifying yellow eyes watching her. Mary Jane later visits the hospital. She confesses to Peter that she has stopped returning Harry's calls. Her heart belongs to someone else, Spider-Man. Trying to mask his emotions, Peter explains that he occasionally photographs the hero and even once asked Spider-Man what he thought of her. He shares a poetic description of how overwhelming it feels to look into her eyes. Deeply moved, MJ squeezes his hand. Aunt May quietly listens, pretending to rest, while Harry walks in and witnesses their closeness. Feeling betrayed, he goes home and tells his father that MJ loves Peter, not him, and that Peter has loved her since childhood. Norman absorbs this information carefully, recognizing another weakness to exploit. He embraces Harry, hiding his darker intentions. At the hospital, Aunt May gently encourages Peter to tell MJ how he truly feels, but Peter realizes that if others can see his feelings, the Goblin likely can too. Panic sets in. He tries calling MJ, but the voice on the other end is the Green Goblin's. He instructs Peter to meet him at the Queensboro Bridge. When Spider-Man arrives, he finds MJ held hostage. The Goblin then tears a trolley car filled with children from its track cables and forces Peter into a cruel choice: save the woman he loves or save the children. He drops both. Refusing to choose, Spider-Man dives into action, managing to catch MJ while also securing the falling trolley with webbing. Straining under the immense weight, he struggles as the Goblin attacks. Suddenly, bystanders on the bridge begin hurling debris at the Goblin, shouting in support of Spider-Man. Their defiance buys Peter enough time to lower MJ and the trolley safely onto a passing barge. The Goblin retreats to an abandoned building, and Spider-Man follows. Their brutal final battle leaves Peter nearly victorious until the Goblin removes his mask. It's Norman Osborn. The shock causes Peter to hesitate. Seizing the opportunity, Norman summons his glider for a surprise strike. Peter's instincts kick in at the last second. He leaps aside, and the glider impales Norman instead. Mortally wounded, Norman whispers a final plea to Peter, not to tell Harry the truth before dying. Spider-Man returns Norman's body home, but is spotted by Harry, who mistakenly believes the hero murdered his father. At the funeral, Harry swears vengeance against Spider-Man. Standing before Uncle Ben's grave, Peter understands the painful truth: loving someone makes them vulnerable. When MJ later confesses her love and kisses him, Peter gently pulls away, choosing distance over happiness to protect her. As he walks off, heartbroken but resolute, MJ senses something familiar in that goodbye. And Peter accepts that being Spider-Man means sacrifice, no matter the cost. Analysis: before the Marvel Cinematic Universe, before billion-dollar superhero crossovers, before post-credit scenes became a tradition, there was one movie that changed everything. In 2002, Spider-Man didn't just hit theaters, it redefined what a superhero movie could be. It proved that comic book characters weren't just for spectacle, they were for storytelling, real storytelling, with heart. With consequences, with emotion. This wasn't just about a guy in a suit swinging between skyscrapers. It was about a teenager who felt invisible, a kid who got power and lost something far more important. A hero who learned the hardest lesson imaginable, that power without responsibility destroys lives. And that's why this film still matters. Directed by Sam Raimi and led by Tobey Maguire's deeply human performance, Spider-Man 2002 gave audiences something rare for its time. Vulnerability: the action was thrilling, yes, the villain was unforgettable, but underneath it all was a simple, universal story about growing up, about mistakes, about guilt, about sacrifice. This movie didn't rely on universe building or interconnected franchises. It stood on its own. It told a complete, emotional origin story that made us believe a superhero could exist in our world, not just through visual effects, but through feeling. And today, we're diving deep into why this film became a cultural turning point, why it still resonates more than 2 decades later, and what makes it one of the most important superhero movies ever made. Because this isn't just the story of Spider-Man, it's the story of responsibility, and it all started here. Let's rewind to 2002. Superhero movies were still finding their identity. Audiences weren't sure if comic book stories could truly carry blockbuster weight, and then Spider-Man arrived. Directed by Sam Raimi, this film brought one of Marvel's most beloved heroes to life in a way that felt both larger than life and deeply personal. Set in modern-day New York City, the story centers on Peter Parker, a shy, intelligent high school student who doesn't quite fit in. He's awkward, he's overlooked, he's the kind of kid who watches life from the sidelines. Until one moment changes everything. After a genetically altered spider bite gives him extraordinary abilities, super strength, enhanced agility, heightened senses, Peter suddenly has the power most people only dream about. But this isn't a power fantasy. It's an origin story about what happens after the wish is granted. The film blends superhero action with drama and romance, creating something that feels grounded despite the comic book premise. Yes, there are breathtaking web-swinging sequences. Yes, there are explosive confrontations. But at its core, this is a character-driven story about responsibility and identity. And opposite Peter stands a formidable force, a brilliant scientist whose own experiment spirals into something far darker. Their collision isn't just physical, it's ideological, hero versus villain. Responsibility versus ambition, choice versus corruption. What makes Spider-Man 2002 stand out isn't just its spectacle, it's its sincerity. The film treats its characters seriously. It invests in their relationships. It makes you care before it makes you cheer. If Chapter 1 was about why this movie changed cinema, Chapter 2 is about understanding what kind of story it chose to tell, not just the rise of a superhero, but the birth of a legend. On the surface, Spider-Man 2002 looks like a superhero action film, but that's only half the story. Strip away the suit, remove the web-slinging, take away the explosions. What you're left with is a coming-of-age drama. This film isn't just about fighting crime, it's about growing up. At its core, Spider-Man is built on one powerful theme: responsibility. Peter Parker doesn't start as a hero. He starts as a teenager who finally feels powerful for the first time in his life. And like many people who suddenly gain power, he makes a selfish choice. That choice has consequences, and from that moment on, the story transforms. The movie explores identity, the struggle between who we are and who the world expects us to be. Peter lives two lives, one as an awkward student trying to survive high school, the other as a masked vigilante trying to save a city. But the mask isn't freedom, it's pressure, it's isolation. Then there's sacrifice, perhaps the most important emotional thread in the entire film. Every time Peter chooses to be Spider-Man, he loses something as Peter Parker. Time, relationships, love, simplicity. The film also explores temptation. Power can elevate you or corrupt you. And that contrast becomes clear when we look at the villain's journey. Two men gain extraordinary abilities. One chooses responsibility, the other chooses dominance. Same opportunity, different choices. Emotionally, the tone walks a delicate line. It's sincere, it's dramatic, at times even melodramatic, but intentionally so. Sam Raimi leans into heightened emotion, almost like a live-action comic book panel brought to life. And that sincerity is what gives the story weight. This isn't a cynical superhero film. It believes in heroism. It believes in consequences. It believes in doing the right thing even when it hurts. As for the audience, this film speaks to anyone who has ever felt underestimated, anyone who has ever made a mistake they wish they could undo, anyone who understands that growing up means carrying burdens you didn't ask for. Because in the end, Spider-Man 2002 isn't just a genre movie. It's a story about the moment innocence ends and responsibility begins. Let's step into the story. Peter Parker is just an ordinary high school student in New York City. Smart, shy, invisible to most of the world. He lives with his Aunt May and Uncle Ben, carries a quiet crush on Mary Jane Watson, and spends his days being overlooked. Then during a school field trip, everything changes. A genetically engineered spider bites Peter, and overnight his body transforms. He becomes stronger, faster, his reflexes sharpen, he can cling to walls. And somehow he can shoot webs. At first, it feels like a gift. Peter tests his powers in secret. He realizes he's no longer the weak kid getting pushed around. For the first time in his life, he has control. And instead of thinking about responsibility, he thinks about opportunity. He enters a wrestling match to win quick money. When he's cheated out of his prize, he makes a decision, a small, bitter act of revenge. He lets a thief escape when he easily could have stopped him. That single choice changes everything. That same criminal later carjacks Uncle Ben and kills him. In that devastating moment, Peter learns the hardest lesson of his life. His inaction had consequences. The power he treated casually could have saved someone he loved most. That's the turning point. Peter designs the Spider-Man suit and dedicates himself to protecting the city, not for fame, not for money, but because he owes it to the world and to Uncle Ben. Meanwhile, across the city, Norman Osborn, a brilliant but desperate scientist, faces corporate failure. Under pressure, he tests a performance-enhancing serum on himself. The experiment enhances his strength but fractures his mind. From that experiment rises the Green Goblin. As Spider-Man becomes a symbol of hope, the Goblin becomes a symbol of chaos. Their conflict escalates quickly. What starts as random destruction turns into something deeply personal when Norman discovers Peter's secret identity. Now, it's not just hero versus villain. It's mentor versus student, father versus son figure. Friendship versus loyalty. The Green Goblin attacks the people Peter cares about, forcing him to confront the true cost of being a hero. And in the climactic battle, Spider-Man faces his greatest test. Saving the woman he loves or saving innocent lives. He refuses to choose selfishly. He saves them all. The final fight is brutal and raw, no spectacle, just survival. And when Norman attempts one last betrayal, his own weapon turns against him, ending his life. But victory doesn't feel triumphant. At Norman's funeral, Harry Osborn blames Spider-Man for his father's death. Peter stands silently, carrying the weight of a truth he cannot reveal. And when Mary Jane confesses her love, Peter makes one final sacrifice. He walks away, because being Spider-Man means living alone. Protecting others means denying himself happiness. And that's how the story ends, not with celebration, not with applause, but with a hero who understands that power always comes at a cost. Now let's talk about that ending. Because Spider-Man 2002 doesn't end with triumph, it ends with sacrifice. In the final act, the Green Goblin forces Peter into an impossible situation. He kidnaps Mary Jane and places innocent civilians in danger at the same time. It's a cruel test, a psychological attack. Choose love or choose responsibility. But here's what makes this moment powerful. Peter refuses to accept the choice. Instead of sacrificing one for the other, he risks everything to save both. And in doing so, he proves he has fully embraced the lesson that shaped him. This isn't the selfish teenager from earlier in the film. This is Spider-Man. The final fight between Peter and Norman is raw and brutal. No flashy music, no grand speeches, just two men, battered and exhausted, fighting in the shadows. And then comes Norman's last move, a hidden glider attack from behind Peter. But this time, Peter's instincts save him. The glider strikes Norman instead. In his final moments, Norman drops the villain persona. He becomes a frightened father, and he asks Peter to protect his secret. It's a tragic end, not just for a villain, but for a broken man who chose power over responsibility. But the real emotional punch doesn't come from the fight. It comes at the funeral. Harry Osborn, grieving and angry, blames Spider-Man for his father's death. Standing there, Peter says nothing. He can't defend himself. He can't reveal the truth. He carries the burden silently. And then there's Mary Jane. She finally tells Peter she loves him. She sees him as her hero, not knowing how literal that statement is. This is the moment Peter has wanted since the beginning, and he turns her down, not because he doesn't love her, but because he does. Peter understands something now. Anyone close to him becomes a target. Love becomes a weakness. And being Spider-Man means putting others first, even if it means breaking his own heart. That final swing through the city isn't just a heroic image, it's symbolic. Peter isn't celebrating, he isn't victorious. He's accepting his fate. The ending tells us something crucial. Being a hero isn't about winning fights, it's about choosing the harder path, every single time. And that's why the final message lingers long after the credits roll. With great power comes great responsibility, and sometimes that responsibility costs you everything. Now here's where Spider-Man 2002 becomes even more fascinating. Because beneath the action and drama, there's a layer of symbolism most viewers don't notice on the first watch. Let's start with the most obvious visual theme: masks. Both Spider-Man and the Green Goblin wear masks, but they mean very different things. For Peter, the mask is protection. It hides his identity to keep the people he loves safe. It represents sacrifice. Every time he puts it on, he's choosing responsibility over personal desire. For Norman Osborn, the mask is escape. It allows him to separate himself from his guilt. When he becomes the Green Goblin, he doesn't take responsibility. He blames the other side of himself. Same concept, opposite meaning. Then there's the mirror scene. When Norman talks to his reflection, it's more than a dramatic moment. It's a visual representation of his fractured psyche. The camera doesn't just show two sides of his personality. It shows a man literally divided by ambition and morality. Now think about the wrestling scene early in the film. Peter lets the thief escape out of spite. That moment feels small at first, almost petty, but it's actually the most important scene in the movie. It's pure foreshadowing. That decision triggers Uncle Ben's death. And that death shapes everything that follows. The entire story is built on cause and effect, on how one selfish act can ripple outward. Another subtle detail, the upside-down kiss in the rain. Yes, it's iconic. Yes, it's romantic. But symbolically, it's powerful. Peter can only connect with Mary Jane emotionally while he's Spider-Man, while he's hidden. He has to invert himself, literally hang upside down, to experience closeness. It's romantic, but it's also tragic. Even the city of New York plays a symbolic role. Notice how the people eventually rally behind Spider-Man, throwing objects at the Green Goblin during the final battle. It's a quiet moment, but meaningful. The city Peter protects him back, and that reinforces the film's core idea. Heroism inspires unity. Finally, look at the color symbolism. Spider-Man's red and blue suit feels vibrant, hopeful, almost classic. The Green Goblin's armor is sharp, metallic, and aggressive. One represents humanity, the other represents cold ambition. Nothing in this film is accidental. Sam Raimi directs it like a living comic book, heightened, expressive, almost theatrical. Every frame is designed to feel bold and emotional. So the next time you watch Spider-Man 2002, look closer. Because beneath the webs and explosions, there's a story told through reflections, colors, choices, and consequences. And that's what makes it timeless. Now let's go behind the mask. Because the story of how Spider-Man 2002 was made is almost as interesting as the movie itself. First, casting. Tobey Maguire wasn't the only name considered for Peter Parker. Several young actors were rumored for the role during development. But what made Maguire stand out wasn't just his look, it was his vulnerability. He didn't play Peter like a typical action hero. He played him like a real, awkward teenager, and that choice defined the entire tone of the film. Willem Daf as Norman Osborn, that was a game changer. Not only did he bring intensity to the role, he insisted on performing many of his own stunts. That's why he passed a physical test in full Green Goblin armor before being officially cast. He wanted to prove he could move in the suit. And speaking of that suit, the Green Goblin costume was almost entirely practical. Heavy, restrictive, difficult to breathe in, but that physical discomfort actually added to the character's unsettling presence. Now here's something incredible, the famous cafeteria scene where Peter catches Mary Jane and the tray. That wasn't CGI. Tobey Maguire actually performed that move for real. It reportedly took dozens of takes, but the final shot you see is practical. Every falling item was glued to the tray to create that seamless illusion. Then there's the web slinging. In 2002, CGI wasn't nearly as advanced as it is today. The visual effects team had to invent new techniques to make Spider-Man swing realistically through New York. It was groundbreaking at the time, and it set the standard for future superhero films. Another surprising fact, the film's release timing carried unexpected weight. Originally, the marketing featured a teaser involving the World Trade Center. After the events of September 11, that footage was respectfully removed. The film's eventual release carried a subtle emotional resonance, especially with its portrayal of New Yorkers uniting behind their hero. And financially, the movie shattered records. It became the first film ever to cross $100 million in a single opening weekend in the United States. That moment changed Hollywood's perception of superhero movies overnight. Studios no longer saw comic book adaptations as risky, they saw them as the future. But maybe the most powerful behind-the-scenes detail isn't technical or financial, it's creative. Director Sam Raimi approached the film with sincerity, no irony, no self-awareness. He treated the material like myth, like modern folklore. That's why the emotions feel heightened. That's why the story feels timeless. Because from casting to stunts to visual effects, this wasn't just a blockbuster. It was a leap of faith, and it paid off. To truly understand the impact of Spider-Man 2002, we have to compare it. Because this wasn't just another superhero movie, it became the blueprint. Let's start with the versions that came after it. When The Amazing Spider-Man released in 2012, it brought a darker tone, sleeker visuals, and a more modern Peter Parker. The chemistry felt different, the world felt grittier. But where that version leaned into realism and mystery, the 2002 film leaned into sincerity. Raimi's version felt like a living comic book, bold colors, dramatic emotions, mythic storytelling. It wasn't trying to be cool, it was trying to be heartfelt. Then came Spider-Man, Homecoming in 2017, fully integrated into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. That version embraced humor, tech upgrades, and a younger, more energetic tone. It thrived on its connection to a larger world. But here's the key difference. The 2002 film stood alone. No universe building. No crossover heroes. No safety net. It had to carry the entire emotional weight by itself. And it did. Now let's zoom out further. Before Spider-Man, there was X-Men in 2000, a film that proved superhero stories could be taken seriously. But X-Men felt grounded, restrained, almost cautious in its approach. Spider-Man was different. It embraced spectacle. It embraced color. It embraced iconic imagery, from the upside-down kiss to the final swing through Manhattan. It didn't just aim for respectability. It aimed for myth, and that's why it resonated so widely. It balanced emotion and action in a way that felt accessible to everyone, not just comic book fans. Even compared to modern superhero films packed with multiverse concepts and interconnected timelines, Spider-Man 2002 feels refreshingly simple. One hero, one villain, one emotional journey. That simplicity is its strength. Where some later films rely on scale and complexity, this one relies on heart. And in many ways, that's why it endures, because trends evolve, technology improves, universes expand. But a powerful origin story, that never goes out of style. When Spider-Man 2002 hit theaters, it didn't just succeed, it exploded, opening weekend. Over $100 million in the US alone, the first film in history to ever cross that mark at the time. That wasn't just a win, that was a statement. Superhero movies weren't niche anymore, they were mainstream. Audiences showed up in massive numbers. Kids, teenagers, adults, even people who had never picked up a comic book. The film tapped into something universal. It wasn't just about powers. It was about responsibility, loss, first love. Growing up, and people connected with that. Critics, surprisingly, were largely on board too. They praised the film's emotional sincerity, its strong origin story, and Willem Dafoe's intense performance as the Green Goblin. Many highlighted how it balanced spectacle with heart, something superhero films would continue chasing for years. Was it perfect? No. Some pointed out moments of early 2000s CGI that haven't aged flawlessly. Others felt the dialogue occasionally leaned into melodrama. But here's the important part. The sincerity worked. In an era before irony became the dominant tone in superhero storytelling, Spider-Man wore its heart on its sleeve. And instead of feeling outdated, it felt bold. Over time, the film hasn't faded into nostalgia, it's become foundational. When people talk about the birth of the modern superhero era, this movie is always part of the conversation. It wasn't underrated, it wasn't divisive, it was defining. Even today, more than 2 decades later, fans still revisit it not just out of nostalgia, but out of respect. Because without Spider-Man 2002, the superhero landscape we know today might look very different. It didn't just entertain audiences, it changed the game. So after all these years, does Spider-Man 2002 still hold up? The short answer, yes, but not just because of nostalgia. This film's greatest strength is its heart. It understands that a superhero story only works if the human story works first. And Peter Parker feels real. His guilt feels real. His sacrifices feel real. The action, iconic for its time. The villain, intense, theatrical, unforgettable. The emotional moments, still powerful. It delivers spectacle, but it never forgets character. Now are there flaws, of course. Some of the CGI shows its age. A few lines of dialogue lean into early 2000s melodrama. and the tone is unapologetically earnest, which might feel different compared to the more self-aware superhero films we get today. But here's the thing. That sincerity is exactly why it works. It doesn't wink at the audience. It doesn't hide behind humor. It believes in its hero, and that belief is contagious. If you love character-driven origin stories, this is essential viewing. If you're curious about where the modern superhero era truly began, this is required watching. And if you simply want a story about responsibility, sacrifice, and choosing the harder path, this film delivers. More than just a blockbuster, Spider-Man 2002 is a turning point in cinematic history. It reminded us that heroes aren't defined by powers, they're defined by choices. And more than 2 decades later, this one still swings strong. REVIWS. When Marvel's iconic wall crawler finally swung onto the big screen in Spider-Man, it felt less like a movie release and more like a cultural event. The comic book universe didn't just dip its toe into cinema, it cannonballed in. What followed was one of the most memorable superhero films of its era. At the heart of it all is Tobey Maguire, whose portrayal of Peter Parker perfectly captures the awkward sincerity of a brainy high school outsider. After being bitten by a genetically modified spider, Peter discovers he can cling to walls, leap across rooftops, and spin webs from his wrists. Watching him stumble through the early days of his transformation, from confused teenager to costumed crime fighter, is both humorous and genuinely heartfelt. The emotional backbone of the story rests on the timeless lesson delivered by his uncle. With great power comes great responsibility. That guiding principle shapes Peter's choices, especially after personal tragedy pushes him from revenge toward heroism. His journey feels earned rather than automatic, grounding the spectacle in relatable human struggle. Veteran performers elevate the supporting cast. Cliff Robertson and Rosemary Harris bring warmth and quiet strength to Aunt May and Uncle Ben, creating a believable home life that explains Peter's moral compass. Meanwhile, Willem Dafoe delivers a layered performance as Norman Osborn, whose descent into madness as the Green Goblin gives the film a villain who is both menacing and strangely tragic. His manic energy, especially that unforgettable cackle, adds theatrical flair without tipping fully into parody. As Mary Jane, Kirsten Dunst plays Peter's spirited crush with charm. Though her character often finds herself in peril, she brings empathy and spark to the role, making the romance believable even as she remains unaware of Peter's secret identity. Director Sam Raimi balances character-driven storytelling with crowd-pleasing action. While the film is packed with spectacle, the wrestling match, the chaotic carnival showdown, the nerve-wracking bridge climax, it never feels overwhelmed by it. Each action sequence carries emotional stakes, reminding us that every punch thrown has consequences. The CGI, groundbreaking for its time, helped redefine what comic book adaptations could achieve. Unlike earlier attempts that leaned too heavily on camp or practical limitations, this film blends digital effects with practical stunt work in a way that mostly holds up. The sweeping views of New York City, with Spider-Man soaring between skyscrapers, gave audiences a thrilling new perspective of the urban jungle. Composer Danny Elfman provides a heroic, if understated, score that complements the visuals without overpowering them. The cinematography and dynamic camera movement, particularly during the early transformation scenes, inject flashes of Raimi's signature flair. This adaptation may not be Raimi's most daring film, but it remains one of his most accessible and widely beloved. Individually, its elements are solid. Together, they create something remarkably cohesive. More than just another superhero flick, it feels like the moment modern comic book cinema truly found its stride. Years later, despite reboots, sequels, and stage adaptations, there's something uniquely earnest about this first outing. It captures the wonder of discovering extraordinary abilities and the heavy burden that comes with them. By the time the credits roll, it's hard not to share that same wide-eyed grin, a rare early 2000s blockbuster that still feels sincere, energetic, and full of heart. I grew up knowing who Spider-Man was. I wasn't a die-hard comic reader, so I'll leave the deep canon debates to the lifelong fans. Still, I understood the essence of the character. When the film first came out, I watched it simply as a moviegoer, not as someone looking for a frame-by-frame tribute to the source material. And on that level, it works remarkably well. Interestingly, my own kid walked out of the theater years ago feeling frustrated about the creative liberties taken with the character. That's fair, adaptations always stir debate. But stepping back from expectations and viewing it purely as cinema, I found it to be an engaging and thoughtfully made film. The movie introduces Peter Parker, portrayed by Tobey Maguire, as a socially awkward but brilliant high schooler whose life changes after a genetically altered spider bite grants him extraordinary abilities. At first, he's hesitant, unsure of how to use these new gifts, and too shy to even approach the girl he cares about, Mary Jane, played by Kirsten Dunst. A personal tragedy pushes Peter toward a greater purpose, leading him into conflict with the Green Goblin, brought to life with intensity by Willem Daf. Complicating matters further, the villain is the father of Peter's closest friend, Harry Osborn, played by James Franco. Franco deserves special mention here. His portrayal of Harry is moody and layered, torn between loyalty, jealousy, and emotional confusion. That internal struggle quietly sets up compelling threads for future installments. Director Sam Raimi, previously celebrated for his work on the Evil Dead series, brings both heart and kinetic energy to the project. Raimi juggles high-flying action with intimate character drama, ensuring the emotional stakes are never overshadowed by spectacle. The web-swinging sequences remain exhilarating even today. Watching Spider-Man soar between skyscrapers still delivers that rush of vertigo and wonder. Yet the film never forgets that Peter Parker is the core of the story. He's not just a nerd-turned-superhero. He's a young man burdened with responsibility, guilt, and difficult choices. The script allows Peter to experience real emotional weight. You feel his hesitation, his heartbreak, and the consequences that come with power. The romance between Peter and Mary Jane feels sincere, and his friendship with Harry adds layers of tension, especially as loyalties begin to fracture. Some fans argue that the Green Goblin wasn't portrayed as powerfully as he could have been, or that a different adversary might have made a stronger introduction. Personally, I found him unsettling in the right way, volatile, theatrical, and unpredictable. More importantly, his arc plants seeds for the sequels, leaving unresolved tensions that promise future conflict. The film also features a fun string of cameo appearances. Raimi regular Lucy Lawless pops up briefly as a punk rocker. Bruce Campbell steals a few moments as an over-the-top wrestling announcer. Ted Raimi appears as a newsroom employee. Perhaps the most unexpected cameo comes from Robert Kerman, who plays a ship captain. Genre fans may recognize him from his role as Professor Monroe in Cannibal Holocaust, an amusing bit of trivia for those aware of his film history. The casting proves to be one of the movie's greatest strengths. Maguire captures both the awkwardness and quiet resilience of Peter Parker. Dunst brings warmth and charm to Mary Jane. Dafoe delivers a performance that swings between controlled menace and explosive fury. Franco subtly builds emotional complexity that pays off later. Peter's aunt and uncle are portrayed with grace by veteran actors, grounding the story with heartfelt sincerity. Even the newsroom subplot, featuring a boss who constantly underestimates Peter's talent, adds a touch of relatable frustration to the narrative. There are minor imperfections. No film is flawless, but none significant enough to overshadow what works so well. In fact, revisiting the movie years later only highlights how carefully the characters and relationships were written. At its core, this is more than a flashy superhero origin story. It's about responsibility, sacrifice, friendship, and growing up in a world that can be harsh and unforgiving. The action sequences entertain, but it's the humanity beneath the mask that makes the film endure. Whether you're a lifelong comic enthusiast or just someone looking for an engaging movie night, this first chapter of Raimi's trilogy remains a thoughtful and exciting piece of superhero cinema. Rewatching Spider-Man 2002 in 2024 felt like opening a time capsule from the early days of modern superhero cinema. Directed by Sam Raimi, this film didn't just introduce a new comic book hero to the big screen, it helped redefine what superhero movies could achieve. The screenplay, inspired by the work of Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, and adapted for the screen by David Koepp, remains engaging and accessible. Even viewers unfamiliar with the comics can easily immerse themselves in Peter Parker's journey. The film balances heartfelt character development with energetic action, making its 121-minute runtime feel brisk and purposeful. The narrative is cleanly structured. The first half follows Peter as an awkward high school student discovering his newfound abilities. We meet the key people shaping his life, witness the tragic loss that alters his moral compass, and even enjoy a memorable and slightly campy wrestling sequence. The second half escalates into a full-blown clash between Spider-Man and his arch-nemesis, delivering spectacle while keeping the emotional stakes intact. Tobey Maguire brings sincerity and vulnerability to Peter Parker. While some may debate his portrayal compared to Andrew Garfield, Maguire's version has a certain earnest charm that fits Raimi's tone perfectly, even if he was already in his 20s playing a teenager. The true standout, however, is Willem Dafoe as Norman Osborn, also known as the Green Goblin. His performance is electrifying, intense, theatrical, and deeply unsettling when needed. He doesn't just play a villain, he embodies one. The psychological unraveling of Osborn parallels Peter's transformation in fascinating ways. Both men pursue what they desire most. Peter longs for Mary Jane, while Osborn is desperate to secure his company's future. Yet their choices lead them down vastly different paths, one toward heroism, the other toward destruction. James Franco portrays Harry Osborn with youthful vulnerability, setting up emotional tension that hints at future conflict. J.K. Simmons steals every scene he appears in as J. Jonah Jameson, delivering rapid-fire dialogue with impeccable comedic timing. Long before her Oscar win, Octavia Spencer even makes a brief but notable appearance. Supporting players like Kirsten Dunst as Mary Jane Watson add emotional grounding, and the iconic upside-down kiss between her and Spider-Man remains one of the most recognizable moments in superhero cinema. At its core, the film explores the cost of power and the burden of responsibility. The tragic death of Peter's uncle serves as the moral foundation of the story, teaching him that inaction can have devastating consequences. This lesson shapes every decision he makes thereafter. The parallels between Peter and Norman are especially compelling. Both initially battle external pressures, bullies, rival corporations, before facing internal conflicts that truly test their character. Peter embraces accountability. Norman succumbs to his darker impulses. That contrast gives the film emotional depth beyond its action sequences. No movie is flawless. Mary Jane's love confession near the end feels slightly over the top, and Peter's restrained response, turning her down despite lifelong feelings, can feel frustrating, even when viewed through the lens of responsibility. It's understandable but emotionally bittersweet. In 2002, Spider-Man dominated the box office, outpacing major franchises like Harry Potter and The Chamber of Secrets, The Lord of the Rings. The Two Towers and Star Wars, Episode II, Attack of the Clones. That success wasn't accidental. It struck the perfect balance between spectacle and heart. With memorable direction from Raimi, strong performances, and a script that respects its source material while standing confidently on its own, Spider-Man remains a cornerstone of superhero filmmaking. More than 2 decades later, it's still an exhilarating ride, one that blends action, emotion, and nostalgia into something genuinely special. Highly recommended. The performances in Spider-Man are genuinely engaging, with the cast doing an admirable job of turning comic book figures into believable, emotionally grounded characters. On a visual level, the film remains impressive, though you can occasionally spot its age. Some of the early 2000s CGI hasn't aged perfectly, and a few digital sequences look slightly artificial by today's standards. Even so, the overall presentation holds up well, and the movie continues to deliver a strong cinematic experience more than 2 decades later. If you haven't yet watched director Sam Raimi's 2002 take on the web-slinging hero, it's absolutely worth your time, whether you're typically into superhero films or not. It's the kind of movie that rewards repeat viewings. Personally, I've found it just as entertaining each time I revisit it, and that says a lot considering I'm not usually drawn to the genre. The story centers on Peter Parker, an awkward teenager navigating the usual growing pains of adolescence, except in his case, those changes are triggered by the bite of a genetically altered spider. As Peter discovers his extraordinary abilities, he also learns a hard truth: power comes with responsibility. At the same time, Norman Osborn, the ambitious father of Peter's best friend, is developing advanced military technology, including a flying glider and performance-enhancing formula. When his corporate ambitions crumble, he experiments on himself, transforming into the unhinged Green Goblin. What follows is a straightforward but compelling clash between hero and villain, no convoluted world domination scheme, just a personal battle that keeps the stakes focused and intense. Unlike some comic book adaptations that struggled to translate their source material effectively, such as The Punisher or certain entries in the Batman and Robin era, this film stands alongside early 2000s successes like X-Men as proof that superhero stories can thrive on the big screen. While it makes small adjustments to the original lore, these tweaks rarely detract from the narrative and mostly serve the cinematic format. The first half of the movie is particularly enjoyable, as we witness both Spider-Man's and the Green Goblin's origins unfold. Peter's early attempts to test his newfound powers provide moments of humor and relatability. When the central conflict finally takes off, it keeps things refreshingly simple. A battle between good and evil, stripped of unnecessary complications. Admittedly, not all the special effects have aged gracefully. Some computer-generated shots feel stiff, and there are moments where the digital characters don't quite blend seamlessly with the live-action footage. The Green Goblin's armored suit may not mirror the classic comic design and occasionally resembles something from a campier franchise, but it ultimately works within the film's tone. For the most part, the mix of practical and digital effects comes together effectively. Where the film truly shines is in its cast. Tobey Maguire brings a sincere awkwardness to Peter Parker that makes the character relatable. He may not deliver constant quips behind the mask, but he conveys vulnerability and heart, even when his face is hidden. Willem Dafoe fully commits to Norman Osborn's descent into madness, elevating what could have been a cartoonish villain into something surprisingly layered. His scenes confronting his own fractured psyche are particularly memorable. Kirsten Dunst adds warmth to Mary Jane, giving the character more depth than a typical damsel in distress role might allow. One standout performance comes from J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson. He captures the blustering, fast-talking newspaper editor perfectly, injecting sharp humor into every scene he's in. Fans of Oz might be surprised to see him in such a comedic role, but he nails it and looks as if he stepped straight out of the comic panels. The supporting cast, including familiar faces like Bruce Campbell, adds to the film's charm. In the end, this adaptation strikes a balance between heartfelt character moments and thrilling superhero spectacle. It may show its age in places, but its strong performances and focused storytelling ensure it remains an enjoyable and highly rewatchable classic. Back in 2002, this film really felt like a defining moment for Marvel. It was the project that could either open the door to a cinematic universe or quietly close it. As we now know, it clearly did the former. I caught it in theaters when it first premiered, though I wasn't reviewing movies at the time, so this reflection comes a bit belatedly. Revisiting it nearly a decade later stirred up many of the same reactions I had the first time around. The streamlined take on Spider-Man's origin story works remarkably well. Peter's gradual understanding of his abilities is handled with care, and the emotional turning point involving Uncle Ben, Cliff Robertson, still carries weight. By the time Peter receives that heartfelt guidance from his uncle about being mindful of the person he chooses to become, we're already invested in his secret and aware that something monumental is unfolding for this young hero. One of my favorite traditions with Marvel films is spotting the brief cameo from comic book icon Stan Lee. In this movie, he appears during the chaos at the Unity Day Festival when the Green Goblin attacks, quickly ushering a young girl out of harm's way. The moment flashes by so fast that you might miss it if you blink. Interestingly, his role is listed simply as man and fair, though guy who saves the girl might have been more fitting. Another memorable scene features wrestling legend Randy Savage, better known to fans as Macho Man, portraying the over-the-top Bonesaw McGraw. His flamboyant personality fits perfectly within the exaggerated world of professional wrestling depicted in the film. Watching him deliver his trademark flying elbow drop before Peter steps into the ring as the human spider remains a standout moment. Learning of Savage's passing years later was saddening, as he was undeniably a larger-than-life figure, both inside and outside the ring. Beyond the nostalgia, the film strikes a solid balance between character development and spectacle. The dynamic between Peter Parker and Norman Osborn, played with intense energy by Willem Dafoe, drives much of the drama. While I've always found the Green Goblin costume slightly awkward, the rigid armor and fixed expression can feel a bit dated. It's a minor quibble in an otherwise engaging superhero debut. Looking at the cast as a whole, Tobey Maguire brings an earnest vulnerability to Peter Parker that makes him relatable. Willem Dafoe gives Norman Osborn a chilling edge, walking the line between brilliant scientist and unhinged villain. Kirsten Dunst plays Mary Jane Watson with charm and emotional depth, while James Franco portrays Harry Osborn as both loyal friend and conflicted son. Cliff Robertson and Rosemary Harris round out the Parker household with warmth and sincerity. Interestingly, this was also around the time I first became aware of Stan Lee as a public figure beyond the comics page. His pop culture presence was expanding rapidly, even popping up on shows like The Simpsons around that period. The early 2000s were clearly a landmark era for him. Ultimately, this film serves as a strong and entertaining launchpad for Marvel's future in cinema and for Spider-Man's journey on the big screen. It reinforces the timeless idea that extraordinary abilities come with moral obligation, a theme that has since become central to the superhero genre as a whole. Even for someone who wasn't deeply immersed in comic books or graphic novels, depending on your preference, this movie delivers more than flashy action. It offers heart, humor, and a hero struggling to find his place in the world. If you're a fan of Marvel's iconic wall crawler or enjoy director Sam Raimi's distinctive style, particularly if you've seen his earlier work like The Evil Dead, there's plenty here to appreciate. All things considered, it remains a fun and impactful superhero film that helped reshape modern blockbuster cinema and proved that Spider-Man belonged on the big screen. One day on a school trip to a genetics laboratory, he is bitten by a genetically engineered super spider, and he goes through radical changes. He eventually practices his abilities, and after the death and revenge of his Uncle Ben, Cliff Robertson, he becomes the savior for New York, web-swinging, crime-fighting superhero Spider-Man. Meanwhile, Norman Osborn Willem Dafoe has a similar accident where he injects a performance-enhancing drug and becomes evil alter ego, the Green Goblin. Also starring James Franco as Harry Osborn, Rosemary Harris as May Parker, J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson, Bill Nunn as Joseph Robbie Robertson, Ted Raimi, Sam's brother, as Hoffman, and The Evil Dead's Bruce Campbell as ring announcer. With great action, some light violence, great music by Danny Elfman, he also did Batman, a love story and great special effects, fun for everyone. It was nominated the Oscars for Best Sound and Best Visual Effects, and it was nominated the BAFTA for Best Special Visual Effects. It was number 46 on the 100 Greatest Family Films. Very good. Having already proved himself more than capable of creating a fun comic book-style movie with Darkman, 1990. Sam Raimi finally had a crack at the real thing in 2002 with Marvel's Spider-Man, and he did a remarkably good job, delivering a slick, action-packed major studio summer blockbuster that genuinely feels like a superhero comic strip brought to life, with colorful cinematography, perfectly nuanced performances, and the director's playful visual style very much in evidence, as opposed to those dreary Nolan Batman films that take matters far too seriously. Starring Tobey Maguire as the titular web-slinger, Spider-Man is an origins movie, and as such takes a while to get the slam-bang action, but the characters are so well defined and the script, by David Cope, so smartly written that boredom is never an issue. I've never been much of a fan of comic book movies that dwell too heavily on the whole tortured soul aspect of their central character, as in Nolan's miserable Batman films. And with Spider-Man being one of Marvel's classic, emotionally troubled heroes, there was serious potential for this to be a rather joyless affair. Thankfully, Raimi handles the personal trauma in such a manner that it never drags the enjoyment factor down. This is pure entertainment all the way, a real corker of a superhero film that still has the power to wow well over a decade after its original release. Tobey Maguire was always going to have a tough task revitalizing this franchise, but I think he has done a decent job here. The geeky, shy, young Peter Parker, bitten by a genetically modified spider that endows him with superhuman powers, decides to use his newly found prowess for good. Dressed only in a pair of loosely converted pajamas, he polices the streets at night apprehending thugs and petty criminals, whilst during the day he remains the butt of jokes and pranks at school, usually at the hands of school heartthrob/dimwit Flash, Joe Manganiello. He is best friends with Harry, the handsome but pretty ineffective James Franco, who is not only the son of mega-rich scientist Norman Osborn, Willem Dafoe, but who is also dating his own dream girl, Mary Jane, Kirsten Dunst. When his board try to take the Osborn company away from him, Dafoe starts experimenting with drugs that transfer him from a megalomaniac scientist into a megalomaniac Green Goblin, and it falls to Spidey to save the city and, of course, get his gal. Maguire is engaging in this. He has a glint in his eye, and he enters into the spirit of this light-hearted fantasy adventure well. The writing is good in places, if a little too earnest at times, and the visual effects work well. They don't overwhelm the acting, maybe because the spider skills are inherently a little less showy, and this allows the story to focus more on a few engaging characterizations. J.K. Simmons is good as newspaper editor Jameson, and there are a few nice cameo scenes from Cliff Robertson and Rosemary Harris as his uncle and aunt. Sam Raimi has kept the pace tight. There is plenty of action peppered with some humor, some ham from Dafoe, and a decent amount of scary science to keep this moving along well for 2 hours. Breaking with usual tradition, the Spider-Man DVD was released today, a Friday. I picked up the 2-disc edition for roughly $15, a deal that felt impossible to ignore. Since I missed its original theatrical run, this became my first full viewing, and it turned out to be a thoroughly enjoyable introduction to Peter Parker's cinematic journey. The film strikes a satisfying balance between superhero spectacle and tender coming-of-age romance, capturing the early days of Spider-Man with sincerity and energy. As someone who grew up leaning more towards Superman, I still carried fond memories of flipping through Spider-Man comics, and this adaptation respects that legacy. It embraces the spirit of the source material while shaping it into a story that works beautifully on screen. The DVD transfer is impressively crisp, with vivid colors and a sharp image that holds up remarkably well. The Dolby 5.1 audio mix adds depth and immersion, action sequences feel expansive, and quieter character moments remain clear and intimate. With proper surround sound and a widescreen setup, the home viewing experience feels surprisingly close to being in a theater. If anyone is still relying on VHS copies for movies like this, upgrading makes a world of difference. The clarity, audio depth, and bonus material elevate the entire experience. The first disc includes an interactive feature that triggers behind-the-scenes segments at key moments in the film. With a simple click, viewers can jump to a short making-of vignette before seamlessly returning to the movie. There are also multiple commentary tracks for fans who enjoy revisiting films with added insight from the creators. The second disc is packed entirely with extras, screen tests, television specials, production insights, and a fascinating archive of Spider-Man comic covers organized by decade. For longtime comic enthusiasts, this collection alone makes the set worthwhile. The narrative centers on Peter Parker, a shy high school student raised by his aunt and uncle, quietly admiring his neighbor Mary Jane from afar. After an unexpected spider bite grants him extraordinary abilities, Peter discovers that power comes with profound responsibility. Meanwhile, tensions within his best friend's family create the foundation for the rise of a formidable adversary. Directed by Sam Raimi, the film features a memorable ensemble cast. Tobey Maguire as Peter Parker, Kirsten Dunst as Mary Jane Watson, Willem Dafoe as Norman Osborn, James Franco as Harry Osborn, J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson. The casting feels spot on. Maguire captures Peter's awkward vulnerability, while Dafoe delivers a dynamic and at times unsettling performance as the Green Goblin. Dunst brings warmth to Mary Jane, embodying the classic girl-next-door charm, and Simmons nearly steals every scene he's in with his rapid-fire portrayal of the Daily Bugle's editor. The emotional turning points, particularly the tragedy that shapes Peter's moral compass, are handled with care. Action sequences remain thrilling, especially the large-scale city battle and the exhilarating web-swinging scenes that still hold up visually. The CGI, while reflective of its era, complements the story effectively, and the musical score adds heroic weight to Peter's transformation. If there's a minor drawback, it's the Green Goblin costume design, which may not fully capture the menace some fans envisioned. Still, Dafoe's performance compensates with intensity and charisma. Initially, I wasn't certain Raimi was the ideal choice to helm a major superhero blockbuster. Over time, and especially after revisiting this film and its sequel, I've come to appreciate his distinctive touch. What might have seemed like a straightforward studio origin story reveals more personality and heart upon repeat viewings. Overall, Spider-Man 2002 stands as one of the foundational entries in modern superhero cinema. It delivers action, emotion, and memorable performances in equal measure. I'd comfortably rate it a strong 9 out of 10 and recommend it to anyone who enjoys character-driven superhero adventures with genuine heart. In this first chapter of the series, Peter Parker squares off against the Green Goblin, portrayed by Willem Dafoe, who brings a split, tormented edge to Norman Osborn's descent into villainy. Rewatching the film, I found myself drawn to the early character-building moments. The chemistry between Tobey Maguire and Kirsten Dunst feels sincere, grounding the story emotionally. When I first saw it years ago, I wasn't entirely sold on the action scenes. Compared to the raw, scrappy energy of Raimi's earlier horror work like The Evil Dead, some sequences here felt overly polished and effects-heavy. However, as the story settles into Peter's journey, those stylized moments begin to work better within the larger arc. The craftsmanship becomes clearer, and the film's excitement holds up surprisingly well, especially when stacked against some later comic book spectacles that lean more on scale than spirit. Over time, I've also come to appreciate Maguire's performance more deeply. His slightly awkward, almost painfully earnest take on Peter Parker might feel unusual at first, but it ultimately suits the character's vulnerability. That awkwardness becomes part of the charm, and it develops even further in the sequels. Comic book adaptations have since become one of Hollywood's most dependable genres, but at the time, entrusting the project to Sam Raimi was both inspired and slightly unexpected. Unlike directors who came from music videos or purely commercial backgrounds, Raimi had already shown strong stylistic control in earlier films. Following the precedent set by Tim Burton with Batman and Bryan Singer with X-Men, Raimi approached this material with visible enthusiasm and genuine fan devotion. The result exceeded expectations and became a massive, well-earned hit, marking a major commercial breakthrough for him. Why did Spider-Man resonate so strongly? Much of the credit goes to the team Raimi assembled. His direction pulses with momentum. The film rarely slows down, carrying viewers along with Peter's transformation from shy teenager to web-slinging hero. By the end, there's a sense of exhilaration that makes you want to spend more time in this world. The movie strikes a satisfying balance between thrilling set pieces and an intimate psychological look at its protagonist. Humor and heart are woven throughout, preventing the spectacle from overwhelming the story. Screenwriter David Koepp deserves recognition for shaping a tight, character-focused screenplay. The script respects the spirit of the original comics while framing Peter's journey as a coming-of-age test. Before fully embracing his heroic identity, Peter experiments with his abilities, first in schoolyard confrontations and later in a wrestling ring, learning hard lessons about responsibility before donning the iconic red and blue suit to face real danger in New York, including his ultimate clash with the Green Goblin. Of course, strong writing means little without the right cast. Maguire arguably found his defining role here, channeling insecurity and sincerity in equal measure. Dunst brings warmth and relatability, making Mary Jane more than just a romantic interest. Dafoe, meanwhile, relishes every unhinged moment, delivering a performance that ranks among his most memorable. Even J.K. Simmons, in a comparatively small role, injects such sharp comic energy that he nearly steals every scene he's in. Looking back, this Spider-Man remains a cornerstone of early 2000s superhero cinema, earnest, energetic, and emotionally grounded. It may not be flawless, but its heart, performances, and directorial passion ensure that it still swings high above many of its successors. While the visual effects are often impressive, they aren't always handled with complete finesse. At times they feel slightly overdone, and the screenplay carries a handful of familiar tropes surrounding its central hero, particularly in the opening act. Still, these are minor blemishes in an otherwise cohesive and energetic production. When taken as a whole, Spider-Man stands tall as a polished blockbuster that manages to please longtime comic enthusiasts and general moviegoers alike. Directed by Sam Raimi, the film runs close to 2 hours, yet it never drags. The pacing remains tight and engaging throughout, delivering a cinematic ride that's hard to resist. The sequel, released in summer 2004 with the same creative team, proved that lightning can strike twice, matching, and in many ways reinforcing, the triumph of the original. After all, when something works this well, why reinvent it? Although it may not surpass the very finest entries in the Superman or Batman franchises, it certainly outshines their weaker installments. One of the greatest strengths of Spider-Man has always been its origin story, and much of that emotional foundation translates effectively to the screen. The heart of Peter Parker's transformation lies not just in the bite of a radioactive spider, but in a pivotal moral failure, his decision not to intervene when he has the chance. That choice ultimately leads to tragedy and cements the timeless lesson that power demands responsibility. The addition of the Green Goblin and certain narrative adjustments slightly dilute the purity of this arc, yet the core emotional impact remains intact. It is, at its essence, still a compelling tale of growth and accountability. One drawback, however, is the tendency for some action sequences, particularly the clashes between Spider-Man and the Green Goblin, to lean toward a near-animated spectacle. While Tobey Maguire and Willem Daf convincingly establish their characters in the dramatic scenes, the heavy reliance on CGI occasionally strips away some of their humanity during the larger set pieces. That said, Dafoe brings a theatrical intensity to Norman Osborn, and James Franco fits well as Harry, the conflicted son caught between loyalty and revelation. The casting choices across the board feel thoughtful and effective. Raimi also sprinkles in delightful touches for fans. Hearing playful nods to other heroes and seeing the warmth of Aunt May and Uncle Ben adds emotional texture. Rosemary Harris and Cliff Robertson lend authenticity and heart to their roles, while Kirsten Dunst's Mary Jane Watson brings both vulnerability and charm to Peter's world. Following the success of comic book adaptations at the turn of the millennium, most notably X-Men 2000, it was only a matter of time before Spider-Man swung onto the big screen. First appearing in Amazing Fantasy number 15 in 1962, the character quickly became one of Marvel's most beloved creations. Conceived by Stan Lee, with visual and narrative contributions from Steve Ditko, Spider-Man grew into a cultural icon, rivaling legends like Batman and Superman. Interestingly, filmmaker James Cameron once pursued the opportunity to adapt the character. His proposed version included a mix of villains such as Electro and Sandman, unconventional ideas about the web shooters, and a darker portrayal of Mary Jane. Production complications and shifting studio rights ultimately prevented his vision from materializing, especially once Cameron turned his attention to Titanic. It remains an intriguing what-if scenario for fans. Eventually, screenwriter David Koepp, known for major successes like Jurassic Park, Mission Impossible, and Panic Room, reworked earlier concepts into a more streamlined and accessible script. With adjustments and refinements, his version gained studio approval and paved the way for Raimi's now-classic interpretation. In the end, Spider-Man succeeds because it respects its source while embracing the spectacle of cinema. It may not be flawless, but its blend of emotion, action, and sincerity makes it one of the standout superhero films of its era. With the screenplay finalized, the next major step was selecting the right director to bring the project to life. Several notable names were reportedly considered, including Chris Columbus, known for Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, and David Fincher, acclaimed for Fight Club. Ultimately, the studio placed its trust in Sam Raimi. Raimi had earned recognition for cult horror titles like The Evil Dead and Army of Darkness, along with well-received thrillers such as The Gift and A Simple Plan. At first glance, Raimi, despite openly expressing admiration for the web-slinging hero, did not seem like the most obvious candidate for a large-scale superhero blockbuster. However, his strong storytelling instincts and success in blending character drama with tension convinced the studio to move forward with him. A significant creative decision was also made to focus on a single central villain rather than juggling multiple antagonists, helping streamline the narrative and heighten the dramatic impact. Casting the lead role was equally crucial. Tobey Maguire was selected to portray the iconic hero. Prior to this, he had delivered compelling performances in films like Pleasantville, Ride with the Devil, Wonder Boys, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, and The Cider House Rules. Although Maguire was 26 during production, he convincingly embodied a high school and college-aged Peter Parker. His naturally introspective presence and dramatic depth added emotional weight to the character, elevating the portrayal beyond a typical comic book adaptation. The screenplay, written by David Koepp, drew partial inspiration from the legendary comic storyline The Night Gwen Stacy Died. In the comic narrative, Gwen Stacy meets her tragic end during a confrontation with the Green Goblin atop the George Washington Bridge, though the original artwork resembled the Brooklyn Bridge. This storyline heavily influenced the emotional climax of the film adaptation. However, certain creative choices sparked debate among longtime fans. One of the most discussed changes was the decision to give Spider-Man organic web shooting abilities rather than mechanical web shooters designed by Peter himself. Some argued that this adjustment diminished Peter Parker's scientific brilliance. Yet from another perspective, the change offered internal consistency. If a genetically altered spider granted him enhanced strength, wall-crawling abilities, and a heightened danger sense, why would organic webbing be implausible? While different from the comics, the explanation fits logically within the film's universe. Another point of contention was the prominence of Mary Jane Watson instead of Gwen Stacy, Liz Allen, or Betty Brant. Mary Jane was ultimately chosen because of her broader recognition among general audiences. Interestingly, certain situations in the film, particularly the climactic bridge sequence, echo moments that originally involved Gwen Stacy in the comics. Knowledgeable fans might find these substitutions noticeable, though they serve the streamlined storytelling approach of the adaptation. Setting aside these debated elements, Koepp's script possesses many admirable qualities. It presents the hero in a relatable, grounded way, emphasizing that greatness can emerge from ordinary circumstances. Peter Parker is not portrayed as the strongest or most confident individual, but rather as a shy, financially struggling student trying to navigate everyday life. Spider-Man is not merely a crime-fighting figure in costume. He is also a young man balancing responsibility, work, and family. This duality makes him one of the most human superheroes, flawed, vulnerable, yet determined, enabling audiences to connect with him instantly. Structurally, the screenplay takes an effective approach by dedicating nearly half the film to Peter's transformation. The audience witnesses his life before and after the genetic mutation, observing the subtle and dramatic shifts in his personality and physical abilities. Initially tempted to exploit his powers for personal gain, Peter's worldview changes drastically following a family tragedy. That pivotal moment shapes his sense of responsibility and defines his path as a hero. The evolution feels organic, making his journey compelling rather than rushed. Overall, the film succeeds not only as a superhero spectacle, but as a character-driven origin story grounded in emotion and relatability. The story unfolds with remarkable smoothness, gradually shaping Peter Parker into the hero we root for. His transformation never feels rushed. Instead, it develops naturally, making us constantly sympathize with his struggles. One of the screenplay's greatest strengths lies in how it carefully balances emotional beats with thrilling action. Who could forget the unforgettable upside-down kiss between Spider-Man and Mary Jane in the rain? Or the quiet hospital moment when Peter subtly expresses his feelings for her beside Aunt May? Their conversation in the backyard about life after graduation adds even more emotional weight. And of course, the heartbreaking final scene, when Mary Jane opens her heart to him, only for Peter to turn her away to keep her safe, cements the film's romantic core. These scenes are simple, sincere, and deeply engaging. Willem Dafoe delivers a compelling performance as Norman Osborn. His portrayal gives depth to a character who could have easily been one-dimensional. A brilliant scientist under pressure from military contracts, Osborn experiments on himself, triggering not only physical enhancement but psychological instability. His transformation into the Green Goblin is rooted in desperation and fractured ambition rather than pure evil. The strained relationship with his son adds emotional complexity and gives context to his descent. While the action occasionally takes a backseat to character development, that choice works in the film's favor. Spider-Man's trademark humor during crime fighting is present but restrained, allowing the focus to remain on Peter's internal journey. The core of the film is about growth, an awkward, insecure teenager learning that extraordinary abilities come with heavy responsibility. Still, the blockbuster delivers memorable sequences. The first major confrontation between Spider-Man and the Green Goblin at Oscorp, and the climactic showdown on the Queensboro Bridge involving Mary Jane, a group of students, and the villain's cruel ultimatum. The musical score by Danny Elfman is one of the film's standout elements. Known for his collaborations with Tim Burton on films like Batman and Edward Scissorhands, Elfman crafts a theme here that feels heroic and sweeping, yet tender when needed. Unlike the darker, gothic tones of his previous work, this score embraces a brighter, more adventurous spirit while still capturing moments of tension and romance. Visually, the film reflects the technological peak of its time. While modern viewers may notice some dated CGI, particularly in the web-swinging sequences between skyscrapers, these effects were groundbreaking upon release. The cinematography by Don Burgess and the production design by Neil Spisak successfully recreate the comic book aesthetic. The dynamic camera angles, dramatic close-ups, crouched poses, and web-shooting visuals echo the original panel compositions, giving fans a faithful live-action adaptation. This first big-screen outing of the iconic web-slinger proved to be a massive success and paved the way for 2 sequels, helping establish one of the most profitable superhero franchises in cinema. The tone remains accessible, most scenes take place in daylight, violence is restrained, and the emphasis stays on adventure, humor, and heartfelt emotion rather than brutality. Under the direction of Sam Raimi, and with a sincere performance from Tobey Maguire, the film condenses 4 decades of comic book legacy into an origin story that honors the spirit of the character created by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. Beginning with Amazing Fantasy number 15 in the early 1960s, Spider-Man quickly rose to become one of Marvel's most beloved heroes. This adaptation captures the angst, wonder, and moral challenges that made the original comics resonate with generations of readers. The film looks impressive, carries emotional weight, and blends spectacle with sincerity. Raimi even sneaks in touches of his signature, offbeat humor and energetic action style. In the end, it stands as a story about responsibility, love, and personal evolution, wrapped in thrilling web-slinging adventure. The early 2000s CGI is pushed to its limits here, and surprisingly, it often looks incredible. There are moments when the visual effects genuinely convince you that Spider-Man can soar between skyscrapers like a living, breathing comic book illustration. For a 2002 release, the spectacle still holds impressive weight. Willem Dafoe steps into the role of Norman Osborn / the Green Goblin with intensity and unpredictability. At times, especially once the mask goes on, his performance borders on theatrical madness, but that wild edge fits the character's unstable duality. The fight scenes between Spidey and the Goblin aren't just flashy, they're heavy, aggressive, and physically punishing. Those brutal clashes give substance to the otherwise playful tone Peter Parker carries while cleaning up everyday street crime. Kirsten Dunst delivers a solid performance as Mary Jane Watson, Peter's longtime crush and emotional anchor. James Franco, portraying Harry Osborn, brings a restrained and somewhat rigid presence to the role, fitting for a character caught between friendship and family loyalty. Familiar faces from the comics round out the supporting cast, giving longtime fans plenty to appreciate. Cliff Robertson's Uncle Ben delivers the legendary line, "With great power comes great responsibility," grounding the film's spectacle in genuine moral weight. Aunt May provides warmth and heart, while J. Jonah Jameson, the sharp-tongued editor of the Daily Bugle, stands out as one of the most entertaining recurring figures, serving as both comic relief and adversary to Peter and Spider-Man alike. Overall, the film is a bold and colorful adventure packed with danger, humor, and heartfelt moments. It feels like a vibrant cinematic tribute to to one of the most beloved superheroes ever created. Personally, I remain fiercely loyal to the Tobey Maguire era of Spider-Man films. For me, no later adaptation has quite captured the same sincerity. Tobey embodies Peter Parker perfectly, awkward, kind-hearted, and quietly heroic. These movies feel crafted with genuine affection for the source material, almost transcending the typical comic book movie label. The first installment, especially, shines as an origin story. There's something timeless about watching everything unfold for the first time. The shy high school outsider, the quiet crush on the girl next door, life with Aunt May and Uncle Ben, and that life-altering spider bite. Mary Jane's look in the first film, complete with the bright red wig, actually stands out more vividly than her later appearances. It adds a comic book vibrancy that suits the tone beautifully. Rosemary Harris brings grace and warmth to Aunt May throughout the trilogy, while Cliff Robertson's Uncle Ben leaves a lasting impact despite limited screen time. J.K. Simmons practically leaps off the comic panels as the fast-talking, perpetually exasperated newspaper editor, delivering rapid-fire one-liners with perfect comedic timing. Willem Dafoe and James Franco make a compelling father-son duo, each capable of charm layered over simmering darkness. And at the center of it all, Tobey Maguire's expressive, almost innocent eyes sell Peter's internal struggle, a reluctant hero trying to make sense of his responsibility in a chaotic city. Naturally, a Spider-Man film thrives on visual spectacle and thrilling action. Whether he's experimenting with his newfound wall-crawling and web-swinging abilities or locked in combat with the Green Goblin, the ride is consistently entertaining. The exhilaration of seeing him swing through New York for the first time remains unforgettable. That said, I initially hoped for an even deeper artistic fusion between two cinematic approaches. Strong visual framing and kinetic movement. Comic books evolved from bold, symbolic imagery into something resembling stained glass storytelling, vibrant colors paired with mythic undertones. Marvel, under Stan Lee's influence, refined that style by making the mythology relatable while energizing each panel with dynamic composition. Even the arrangement of panels on a page became part of the storytelling rhythm. Balancing mythology with visual structure is essential. The more deliberate and composed the framing, the more powerful the mythic resonance becomes. Paradoxically, the stillness within a frame can intensify the motion and drama of the overall story. Spider-Man in particular presents a fascinating blend of these elements. His heroism isn't just about strength, it's about movement, swooping, clinging to impossible angles, perching atop distorted cityscapes. Because of this unique combination of visual framing and acrobatic motion, Spider-Man offers especially rich material for cinematic adaptation. To fully appreciate that opportunity, one must understand a long-standing creative tension within filmmaking, the balance between composition and motion, between myth and momentum. And in many ways, this film manages to honor both. In the earliest days of cinema, moving images were treated as little more than animated photographs. The camera sat at eye level, bolted to a tripod, observing events as a bystander might. Shots were arranged like framed paintings, carefully composed, static, and self-contained. Later innovators transformed this grammar. Montage artists such as Eisenstein revealed that meaning could emerge from the collision of images, while directors like Kurosawa refined the poetic rhythm between them. Then came a more restless philosophy. Filmmakers began to let the camera roam, to stalk, drift, and pry into the action. Under Hitchcock, the lens no longer merely watched, it seemed to think. It leaned forward with curiosity, recoiled in fear, and lingered with suspicion. Tarkovsky and De Palma expanded on this idea, crafting films where the camera felt less like a tool and more like a presence, an invisible character guiding the audience's gaze. Today, digital freedom has made constant motion easy, but not necessarily meaningful. The sweeping, gliding camera has become commonplace, often impressive, rarely expressive. That's why expectations ran high for a character like Spider-Man. After all, Peter Parker is a photographer. The mythology practically demands a movie with a dynamic, intelligent eye. The material invites sharp framing, bold architecture, and perspective shifts that mirror the hero's double life. It offers opportunities for visual wit and moral tension to coexist in the same frame. Instead, what we get is a film whose visual identity rarely rises to match that promise. The spectacle is polished, yes, but the perspective lacks personality. Without a compelling cinematic eye, even the most kinetic superhero can feel curiously static. In many ways, this becomes less a story about Spider-Man and more one dominated by his adversary. The Goblin commands the psychological space. The hero often feels visually confined behind his mask. The story itself remains familiar. On a school science trip, teenager Peter Parker is bitten by a genetically altered spider and develops extraordinary abilities. Wrestling with newfound power and personal tragedy, he chooses the path of a reluctant vigilante. With a sizable budget and director Sam Raimi at the helm, expectations were towering for this first major live-action outing. To Raimi's credit, the film delivers a rousing mix of action and character drama. When it premiered in 2002, it struck a chord with multiple audiences, devoted comic readers, longtime Raimi admirers, and mainstream thrill-seekers alike. It balanced earnest emotion with crowd-pleasing set pieces, giving viewers both spectacle and sentiment. Revisiting it now, in an era shaped by darker, grittier superhero narratives, the film feels almost refreshingly sincere. Raimi resists turning the material into hollow escapism. Instead, he layers the fantasy with shades of melancholy and moral weight. Willem Dafoe's Norman Osborn is more than a stock villain. His fractured psyche lends the Green Goblin a theatrical menace that lingers beyond the explosions. Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker captures the awkward vulnerability and ethical burden of a young man learning that heroism comes at a personal cost. The supporting cast holds its own. Kirsten Dunst grows into the role of Mary Jane Watson, bringing warmth to what could have been a one-note love interest. James Franco adds dimension as Harry Osborn, planting seeds of conflict that echo through the narrative. The film isn't flawless. Some early 2000s CGI now shows its age, and certain design choices, particularly the Goblin's armor, can feel dated. Yet these are relatively minor blemishes on an otherwise well-constructed piece of blockbuster storytelling. In the end, the film succeeds because it remembers that superhero tales thrive on human stakes. While its visual style may not fully harness the daring possibilities of its premise, its heart remains firmly in place. And that sincerity, even more than its web-slinging thrills, is what keeps it watchable years later. With an enormous budget and a fiercely devoted fan base watching closely, director Sam Raimi was handed a monumental task. That he delivered a high-energy comic book adventure with flashes of darkness and emotional sincerity is, in many respects, an impressive accomplishment. The filmmaker behind The Evil Dead weaves a sometimes uneven yet consistently engaging blend of action, suspense, and young romance in Colombia pictures live-action adaptation of Marvel's iconic wall crawler. While the film may not possess the thematic sophistication of Bryan Singer's X-Men, it holds its own when compared to Richard Donner's landmark Superman. Both films embrace a touch of self-awareness without letting their villains dominate the narrative, a balance that sometimes tipped the other way in Tim Burton's Batman adaptations starring Michael Keaton. The casting choices prove to be inspired. Tobey Maguire brings an earnest vulnerability to Peter Parker, while Willem Dafoe injects manic intensity into the Green Goblin. Their performances nearly offset a couple of narrative missteps that neither Raimi nor screenwriter David Koepp fully smooth out. On the technical side, visual effects pioneer John Dykstra, known for his work on Star Wars, delivers digital sequences that let viewers soar between skyscrapers alongside Spider-Man. The web-swinging scenes through New York City are exhilarating and, for the most part, blend seamlessly with the grounded character moments. A smart creative choice comes during the climactic showdown, when the hero's mask is damaged, allowing Maguire's facial expressions to carry emotional weight in the heat of battle. Structurally, the film mirrors the classic superhero origin template established by Superman, making it accessible even to those unfamiliar with Marvel lore. The story unfolds in a high school setting, reminiscent of teen comedies like Can't Hardly Wait. Peter Parker, a shy and frequently bullied student, harbors a crush on his neighbor Mary Jane Watson, played by Kirsten Dunst. Their lives change after a genetically altered spider bites Peter during a school trip to Columbia University. Overnight, he discovers enhanced strength, agility, and the uncanny ability to cling to walls and spin webs. Enter the Green Goblin, a power-obsessed industrialist who takes to the skies on a high-tech glider, spreading chaos across the city. He attempts to recruit Spider-Man as an ally, and when rejected, targets those closest to him, including Aunt May and Mary Jane. The stakes escalate toward a climactic moral test, forcing the hero to make an impossible choice between saving innocent civilians and protecting someone he loves. Yet the film is not without shortcomings. Spider-Man's fully masked presence sometimes dulls the emotional impact, limiting the expressiveness Maguire brings to the role. The first half of the movie, rich with character development and discovery, feels stronger than the more straightforward action-driven second half. Certain plot conveniences, such as the villain failing to capitalize on clear opportunities, strain credibility. A high-tension rescue involving a suspended cable car delivers spectacle, but unfolds in predictably heroic fashion. Despite its record-breaking box office debut, the film may leave some viewers wanting more. For a superhero adventure, it occasionally feels light on grounded action while leaning heavily on CGI spectacle. The Green Goblin's armor, in particular, lacks the menace one might expect from such an iconic adversary. At times, the web-swinging sequences, while technically impressive, resemble an extended amusement park ride. That said, there is undeniable charm here. Raimi's direction shines most in the quieter, character-focused scenes. The chemistry between Maguire and Dunst adds emotional warmth, and the film captures the adolescent awkwardness at the core of Peter Parker's identity. When it slows down and focuses on heart rather than hardware, the movie finds its rhythm. In the end, this take on Spider-Man is a flawed but spirited superhero entry, ambitious, occasionally clumsy, yet filled with genuine affection for its source material. Kirsten Dunst seems poised to step into the kind of stardom once associated with Julia Roberts. She has an effortless charm that makes her instantly likable, and her screen presence is undeniably appealing. With just a bit more emotional depth and maturity in her performances, she could easily become one of the most in-demand actresses in Hollywood. There's even a rain-soaked scene that frames her particularly well, adding to her natural appeal. As for the film overall, it lands squarely in the middle. It's competently assembled and clearly had significant effort poured into it, but something essential feels missing. I wouldn't say I'm hard to please, and I'll admit the production values are strong. The movie manages to cover the core aspects of the character's journey and stays faithful to much of the source material. J. Jonah Jameson is portrayed exceptionally well, arguably one of the most accurate and entertaining elements of the film. Aunt May and Uncle Ben are handled with care and sincerity. Tobey Maguire, however, doesn't entirely convince me in the dual role of awkward teenager and emerging hero. He's serviceable, but not particularly dynamic. Mary Jane works well enough, and the Osborn family dynamic is reasonably faithful to expectations. Willem Dafoe's performance stands out, though not always in the best way. There's an exaggerated theatrical quality to parts of the film, a bit too much melodrama and camp, that can make certain scenes feel unintentionally over the top. It never completely derails the experience, but there are moments where it edges toward uncomfortable excess. The humor, too, often misses its mark. Scenes that seem designed to lighten the tone don't consistently deliver genuine laughs. Visually, the special effects are impressive for the most part. That said, the Spider-Man suit frequently looks overly polished, to the point where it blends awkwardly with the CGI. Even when it's a physical costume, it sometimes appears digital, which can take you out of the moment. Still, as an origin story, the film does what it sets out to do. The pacing is steady, the action sequences are energetic, and the cinematography shows creativity in framing and movement. Most viewers, casual audiences, and longtime fans alike will likely find enough to enjoy. There are a few scenes that might unsettle younger viewers, but nothing extreme. The DVD release is packed with extras, including trailers, featurettes, music videos, commentary tracks, and behind-the-scenes material that fans will appreciate. Now, speaking more broadly, Spider-Man succeeds as a superhero origin film. Many origin stories get bogged down in setup and forget to showcase the hero actually being heroic. This film avoids that trap by giving us both Peter Parker's emotional development and plenty of web-slinging action. Tobey Maguire portrays Peter as genuinely burdened by teenage insecurity and internal conflict before his transformation. The radioactive spider bite, the tragic consequences of his inaction, the creation of the iconic suit, the tension with his best friend's unstable father, and the tentative romantic progress with Mary Jane, culminating in that famous upside-down kiss, are all key milestones handled with care. The climactic battle on a New York bridge is particularly effective and delivers the kind of spectacle audiences expect. The supporting cast is solid overall. Maguire may seem slightly older than a typical high school student, but he captures Peter's awkwardness convincingly. One noticeable omission, however, is the lack of Spider-Man's trademark wisecracks while in costume, a defining trait from the comics that would have added personality to the action scenes. Rosemary Harris and J.K. Simmons are especially well cast, both visually and in performance. The CGI occasionally shows its age, particularly in earlier sequences, but it generally captures the fluid, acrobatic motion that the character demands. At times, the film strives for emotional depth beyond typical superhero fare. While that ambition is admirable, the execution doesn't always fully resonate. Compared to other genre efforts, it can feel somewhat hollow beneath its glossy exterior. The casting itself isn't the problem. Maguire fits the nerdy persona, and James Franco delivers a believable Harry Osborn. The issue lies more in the storytelling weight than the performances. In the end, it's an ambitious, well-crafted superhero film that doesn't entirely transcend its limitations, but still offers enough heart, action, and iconic moments to make it worthwhile. One of the film's greatest strengths is its simplicity. This is a focused, standalone origin story that tells Peter Parker's journey from awkward high school student to masked hero without overcomplicating the plot or obsessing over franchise building. The story feels complete while naturally leaving room for future adventures. The relationship between Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson is handled with care. The chemistry between Tobey Maguire and Kirsten Dunst gives their scenes warmth and authenticity. Some moments are awkward, but that awkwardness actually fits Peter's character and makes their dynamic believable. The supporting cast is another major highlight. Rosemary Harris brings genuine tenderness to Aunt May, while J.K. Simmons absolutely steals every scene as J. Jonah Jameson. Even with limited screen time, Simmons delivers a performance that has become iconic. As for the villain, Willem Daf clearly commits to the dual role of Norman Osborn and the Green Goblin. He shines in the quieter mentor scenes with Peter. However, once the Goblin persona takes over, the performance sometimes leans heavily into theatrical exaggeration. The metallic green costume, particularly the rigid, expressionless mask, can look unintentionally comical, occasionally resembling a Saturday morning TV antagonist. Some of the action sequences, including the final showdown and a particularly cheesy bridge moment involving New Yorkers, don't land as powerfully as intended. Visually, though, nothing compares to seeing Spider-Man swing between skyscrapers. Those web-slinging scenes capture the thrill of the character perfectly and remain some of the film's most exhilarating moments. The score by Danny Elfman is bold and dramatic. While it stands strong as music on its own, some may feel it lacks the instantly recognizable heroic identity that themes like Batman or Superman established for their respective heroes. Still, it adds emotional weight and grandeur to many key scenes. The tone can be undeniably cheesy at times, but considering Raimi's stylistic flair, that blend of sincerity and camp feels intentional. The heightened drama and comic book energy are part of the movie's personality. Even the Green Goblin's over-the-top presentation aligns with that heightened approach. Some action sequences lack impact compared to modern superhero films. The climactic battle doesn't quite reach the emotional or visual heights one might expect. A few dramatic beats tip into melodrama, yet these shortcomings don't completely overshadow the film's heart. Despite its dated effects and occasional campiness, Spider-Man 2002 remains a cornerstone of early 2000s superhero cinema. It delivers excitement, emotional sincerity, and a clear moral message that resonates. Ordinary people can rise to extraordinary responsibility. Above all, it's simply fun. Watching Spider-Man soar across New York City still brings a rush of pure movie magic. It may not be perfect, but as an entertaining, popcorn-style blockbuster, it absolutely succeeds. And it's a big reason why Spider-Man continues to be one of the most beloved Marvel heroes of all time. Revisiting Spider-Man, directed by Sam Raimi, feels a bit like opening a time capsule from the early 2000s superhero boom. I went back to it half expecting that, after years of polished entries from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, this first big-screen adventure of the web-slinger might seem naive or outdated. Thankfully, that worry was mostly unfounded. The film brings a bright, stylized comic book reality to life in a way that still feels sincere and entertaining. It avoids the bland, overly muted aesthetic that dominates many modern blockbusters. While it occasionally leans into melodrama, it's also willing to embrace darkness. Some moments are surprisingly intense, particularly the climactic showdown between Spider-Man and the Green Goblin, which doesn't shy away from brutality and underscores the real risks tied to heroism. Yet through it all, the emotional core of Peter Parker's journey remains intact. There's no real need to recap the plot. It's the classic origin tale. A spider bite grants extraordinary abilities, tragedy strikes with the loss of Uncle Ben, and a young man learns that power demands responsibility. The primary antagonist is the Green Goblin, portrayed with gleeful, almost theatrical madness by Willem Daf. His performance is big and bold, but that excess works because the character himself is unhinged. Alongside him, Tobey Maguire plays Peter Parker with earnest vulnerability. Kirsten Dunst appears as Mary Jane Watson, and James Franco takes on the role of Harry Osborn. It's also fun to spot early appearances from actors who later became more prominent, such as Joe Manganiello and Octavia Spencer. Raimi's stylistic fingerprints are all over the movie. From kinetic tracking shots to playful visual overlays, his direction gives the film a personality that many superhero movies lack. There are even subtle nods to his earlier work, rewarding attentive viewers. The visual effects are impressive for their time, though a few digital sequences show their age. Fortunately, much of the action was achieved practically, and those elements still hold up reasonably well. The story itself remains compelling, supported by committed performances. That said, there are moments that feel exaggerated or overly campy, such as the Goblin's attack on Aunt May, which borders on unintentionally comedic. Compared to more recent portrayals of the character, this version of Spider-Man might feel less sharp-witted, and Maguire arguably appears slightly older than the high schooler he's meant to portray. Even so, his sincerity gives the character heart. When it first premiered, the movie felt like a revelation. After being let down by other highly anticipated blockbusters, this was the rare summer spectacle that actually delivered. It respected its source material, weaving in recognizable elements from the comics rather than inventing everything from scratch. Changes, like the organic web shooters, might have diverged from tradition, but they added humor and streamlined the storytelling. Looking back now, it's clear that the film helped establish a blueprint for the modern superhero era. At the time, it raised the bar for comic book adaptations and proved that these stories could be both commercially successful and emotionally resonant. That said, time hasn't been entirely kind. Beyond the dated CGI, the pacing can feel sluggish, with extended dramatic scenes that slow the momentum. Certain plot points strain logic, and the camp factor, sometimes deliberate, can occasionally undercut the tension. Even so, nostalgia still tugs at me when I think about it. It may no longer rank among my absolute favorites, but its impact on the genre and its genuine sense of fun remain undeniable. For all its flaws, it's a foundational superhero film that paved the way for the cinematic universe we enjoy today. It's unfortunate to admit, but this movie just doesn't hold up for me anymore. I'd happily rewatch Spider-Verse or even The Amazing Spider-Man 2 multiple times before I'd sit down with this one again. The truth is, trying to make a completely serious, grounded Spider-Man film feels like a near impossible task. How exactly do you present villains like the Green Goblin or Dr. Octopus with total realism and not have the audience chuckle? It's a tough balance to strike. That's precisely why Sam Raimi turned out to be such a brilliant choice to direct the film. Drawing from his early horror comedy roots, especially his work on The Evil Dead, Raimi knows how to embrace the absurdity while still delivering pure entertainment. He understands that part of Spider-Man's charm lies in its over-the-top, comic book energy. At the same time, films like The Gift and A Simple Plan prove he can ground a story with compelling human drama. That blend of playful spectacle and emotional sincerity works in this film's favor. The supporting characters are handled with surprising care. Rosemary Harris brings warmth and authenticity to Aunt May, capturing the spirit of the comic version beautifully. And then there's Willem Daf as Norman Osborn, more on him shortly. When Tobey Maguire was first announced as Peter Parker, I remember being skeptical. The kid from the ice storm, really? But Raimi clearly cast him for his acting ability rather than star power, and that decision pays off. Maguire convincingly portrays Peter's awkwardness and vulnerability. Kirsten Dunst, who I've always thought is underrated, delivers a solid performance as Mary Jane. While this isn't among her most powerful roles, she's done remarkable work in films like The Virgin Suicides and Crazy/Beautiful. She still brings emotional weight to the character. I especially appreciated the early exploration of Mary Jane's troubled home life. Unfortunately, once the characters graduate and move to the city, much of that depth fades, and she becomes more of a traditional damsel in distress. James Franco's Harry Osborn stands out as well. He injects more personality into the role than the script necessarily gives him. The film subtly hints at his darker future, setting up potential developments that longtime comic readers will recognize. Now Willem Dafoe. Some critics felt his performance was excessive, but I'd argue that's exactly why it works. His Green Goblin is flamboyant, theatrical, and unapologetically comic book in tone. In fact, I'd place him in the same league as Jack Nicholson's Joker in terms of memorable superhero villains. The scene where Osborn argues with his reflection is particularly fantastic, both unsettling and darkly humorous. J.K. Simmons also deserves special praise as J. Jonah Jameson. His fast-talking, bombastic portrayal of the newspaper editor is one of the film's highlights. Every scene he appears in crackles with energy, and honestly, I could have used even more of him. If I have any real complaints, they lie in a couple of sequences that feel a little too reminiscent of earlier films, particularly a parade attack that echoes Tim Burton's Batman and an action moment that seems inspired by The Matrix. Given how inventive the movie is elsewhere, it's a bit disappointing that those scenes don't feel entirely original. Despite these flaws, the film remains a quintessential summer blockbuster. It's energetic, colorful, and crowd-pleasing. I even found myself considering another theater viewing, something I rarely do with this genre. Walking out, I was genuinely eager for the sequel, wondering why it would take so long to arrive. For fans of Raimi's earlier work, keep an eye out for the brief, humorous cameos from Bruce Campbell and Ted Raimi. They're quick but memorable. Interestingly, after revisiting The Amazing Spider-Man from 2012, I was reminded just how conflicted I felt about this 2002 installment. Nostalgia aside, it's a film that delivers big entertainment, even if it doesn't quite resonate the way it once did. Sometimes a movie just sticks with you for the wrong reasons. A decade later, this one still nags at me, and I can't help but vent about it. What's funny is the random stuff I remember. There's this quick moment of Peter testing his web fluid by firing it at a soda can. I don't remember it because it was pivotal to the plot. I remember it because the can was positioned so perfectly that the logo might as well have winked at the camera. It practically screamed product placement. If the label had been slightly turned away, I probably would have forgotten the scene entirely. Still, that wasn't a deal breaker. It was actually kind of charming. The real frustration came from the writing. The script feels like it was stitched together by different people who never compared notes. Early on, Peter rehearses, or maybe writes, something to Mary Jane about how she doesn't really know him, even though they've lived side by side for years. Then, by the finale, MJ delivers this emotional realization that he's always been there for her. Those two beats clash. They don't complement each other, they contradict. In a massive studio production, how does something that obvious slip through? But honestly, the biggest issue was the villain. The story itself is a blur to me, and that's part of the problem. It didn't leave much of an impression. The antagonist felt underwhelming, and the narrative momentum fizzled instead of building. For a superhero origin, it lacked a strong central conflict to carry everything forward. Looking back, the series as a whole never quite hit the mark for me. Only the second installment really stands out as rewatchable, and even that one didn't fully live up to the later reboot in my opinion. What surprises me most is how few people seemed bothered by the uneven writing. Did everyone else just overlook it? That said, I've learned not to judge a movie too quickly based on trailers alone. I remember seeing early footage for Spider-Man and thinking the effects looked stiff and artificial. The web swinging seemed oddly slow, almost weightless. I nearly skipped it. But I went opening weekend anyway, and the final cut completely won me over. The action flowed, the pacing felt right, and for 2 hours, you genuinely believed he was soaring between skyscrapers. A lot of that credit goes to Sam Raimi and David Koepp, who gave emotional weight to what could have been just another comic adaptation. They elevated Stan Lee's teenage hero into something cinematic while preserving the heart of the character. Tobey Maguire made Peter Parker feel fragile and human. You felt every bruise, every awkward moment, every quiet defeat. J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson was ripped straight from the comics, and Rosemary Harris brought warmth and sincerity to Aunt May. And it's always fun seeing Bruce Campbell pop up in a cameo. Not every performance hit the same level. Kirsten Dunst gave it her all as Mary Jane, but something about the portrayal felt slightly off from how I'd imagined the character. And then there's Norman Osborn. Willem Daf committed fully to the role, but the Green Goblin design, especially that rigid mask, was distracting. Supposedly it was military tech created before Osborn lost his sanity, yet it already looked like something out of a nightmare. The logic there felt thin. Still, the film succeeded where it mattered most. It made you care. It captured the essence of a broke, sarcastic teenager juggling responsibility, guilt, and first love, like Superman. The movie, it takes its time with the origin. You don't even see the full red and blue suit until well into the runtime. But that slow build gives the transformation weight. So yes, the script had issues. The villain lacked punch. Some character beats didn't align, but when it worked, it really worked, and that's probably why it's still worth debating all these years later. You're quickly introduced to the awkward science-loving kid, his longtime girl-next-door crush, his modest life with Aunt May and Uncle Ben, and of course, the legendary spider bite that launches the teenage web-slinger into action. Meanwhile, in what feels like the film's weaker subplot, Peter's best friend's father decides to test an experimental green serum on himself. The result, enhanced strength paired with simmering rage. Not quite Hulk-level fury, though there's definitely a Dr. Jekyll/Mr. Hyde dynamic at play, but more of a bitterness directed at those who oppose his work, and eventually at Spider-Man himself. It's similar to an issue I had with Daredevil's undercooked villain Bullseye. The audience is more or less expected to accept that these antagonists possess extraordinary powers and want the hero gone simply because the comics say so, without deeper development on screen. Another drawback, one that the director never fully addressed in the sequels, is the runtime. All 3 installments stretch longer than necessary, with scenes that could have been tightened. While this first entry arguably flows the best, it still feels like it could have shed 20 minutes without losing impact. That said, the film as a whole is absolutely worth watching. The musical score among Danny Elfman's strongest, the visual effects, the humor, the romance, and the emotional setup all work beautifully together. It serves as a fantastic launchpad for the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. The movie is accessible to viewers of all ages and manages to feel timeless enough to resonate with future generations. So thanks, Spidey, not only for saving the city and the girl, sorry for the mild spoiler, but also for nudging me toward buying a ticket that probably helped some blockbuster like Avatar earn back at least a few extra dollars. Spider-Man is one of the most recognizable comic book adaptations ever brought to the big screen. I vividly remember when it first premiered, I was hesitant to see it, unsure how well it would translate from page to film. Eventually, I gave it a chance and was pleasantly surprised by how faithful and enjoyable it turned out to be. The story centers on Peter Parker, Tobey Maguire, a high school student who gains extraordinary abilities after being bitten by a genetically altered spider during a school field trip. Suddenly gifted with enhanced strength, agility, and spider-like reflexes, Peter must juggle everyday struggles, finances, responsibility, relationships, while facing off against the unhinged Green Goblin, Willem Daf. On top of that, he wrestles with his long-standing feelings for Mary Jane, Kirsten Dunst, adding emotional depth to the superhero spectacle.